From the surface of Kyler III, the world seemed ordinary. Ruins, a hot sun, a wind bringing dust and endless dunes. But the archaeologist Isla knew, beneath these layers of time, something more was hidden. Her teacher had talked all his life about Tal Atra, a vanished city, the heart of the ancient empire of the knowers, where the crystals of understanding and the word that could change the laws of matter were kept. No one believed him. But now, holding in her hand a pulsating fragment of a map found on the sunken moon of Merak, Elan felt he was right. The path led her to the edge of the system, to the belt of silence. There, in the dusty plains, began the sands of Tal Atra. There were legends about them. They were supposedly alive, as if they had a consciousness capable of reflecting the desires and fears of those who came. None of the explorers returned, but Aylin had a key, an artifact in the form of a smooth black spiral that responded to mental impulses. When she stepped onto the first dune, the sand beneath her feet began to move. At first, everything seemed normal, but then the sky began to float. The colors changed, and she saw a figure, her mother, who had died many years ago. She was smiling, calling her name, asking her to stay. Elan froze. Everything inside her was reaching for that voice, but the spiral began to vibrate and her mother was gone. The sands had accepted her, but the test had only just begun. With each step, reality crumbled and reassembled itself. She relived childhood nightmares, met herself, more cruel, more determined, more devoid of doubt. This version knew how to use the sands, how to conquer the city and take knowledge by force. Elan feared that this was her true self. On the seventh day, she found herself in a hall of black glass, where the gates swung open before her. Inside were not ruins but a living city, shimmering like a mirage, existing both here and outside of time. The guardian, a creature of sand and light, told her, "You have passed through yourself, but you are not the first, and you will not be the last." He led her into the heart of Tal Atra, a realm where the images of 1,000 worlds stirred. Her mind resounded with voices. She saw the threads of the future, where empires fell and rose, where her word changed the course of history. The sands absorbed her intentions, shaped the outcome. She had to choose: hide the city again, leave it as it was, or reveal it to the world. But knowledge always comes at a price. If Tal Atra becomes accessible, the race for power will begin, and the very fabric of the galaxy will change. She placed her hand on the sphere and whispered, "Let him who is ready to go through himself find it." The city dissolved into the sands once more. Island returned, not the same as when she left. Now she was the guardian of the way, and her eyes reflected the stars and grains of fate dancing in infinity. Returning to Kaler III, Island did not recognize reality. The world seemed slightly distorted, as if after Tal Atra everything that existed had lost its clear boundaries. It was as if space was listening to her, adjusting to the pace of her thoughts. Birds froze in flight if she looked at them thoughtfully. Grains of sand in the air formed patterns that repeated the images of her memory. It took her a moment to understand. The sands had changed her forever. The connection to Tal Atra remained. Each night her dreams led her to the heart, where future versions of herself whispered warnings. Some were calm, wise, others cruel, driven by will. She began to write, to draw diagrams, to collect evidence. The sands did more than protect the city. They were a knot, connecting infinite realities, and someone else knew it. After several cycles, visitors arrived, not scholars, not artifact hunters. They were emissaries of the Conclave of Lines, a semi-secret brotherhood that monitored anomalous shifts in the fabric of time. They asked no questions. They brought her the staff of the Watcher and a map, not a physical one, but a mental one, etched in the mind of one of their own. The Conclave knew of the sands but could not enter them. Only Ilon was now the link. They asked her to take back control of Tal Atra, for someone had already begun to open similar nodes in other parts of the galaxy, in places where time ran backwards, where thought became matter. These nodes were awakening, and someone was coordinating their activation, someone who knew about the heart. Ilan agreed, but on one condition: she would go alone. The sands only recognize those who go alone. This time she headed for another exit of Tal Atra, hidden on Lox, a dead moon where the void echoed with forgotten names. The sands there were different, darker, slower. They did not reflect desire. They attracted the shadows of the past. She descended into the crater, and the shadows began to speak. The voices of the old guardians, the ones who had failed. One of them had been her teacher. He stood there as if alive with the same kind face, but his eyes were empty. He said, "You woke up what should be sleeping. He hears you. He's already coming." The sands closed in around her. A dome appeared in the center of the crater, an ancient mirror that reflected not Elon, but a figure without a face. A man without a name. He stood on the sands without falling through and looked straight into her soul. She understood. The sands weren't just testing. They were calling for those who could hold or destroy the connection between realities. And now the one who wanted not to know, but to control, was coming to Tal Atra. Him. She took the staff and stepped forward. Her reflection wavered and dissolved into the sands. Only she remained, and a choice that would change not only the world, but the very concept of reality. Tal Atra was waiting for her for the third time, and now the game began according to new rules. There was no time in Tal Atra. When Elon returned, the stars hung in the still sky, and the sands beneath her feet sang with a low, hollow echo. The city greeted her as if she were an old friend, but with reserve, with a slight tension, as if it sensed a foreign presence behind her. She felt him approaching. He was not walking physically. He was shifting probabilities, penetrating the nodes of worlds step by step, subordinating the laws of the transitions to his will. Not a name, not a form, pure will to control, thirst to lock infinity in a linear cage. Tal Atra's heart responded. At the center of the city, where realities converged in a blinding vortex, a portal opened. Not created by Ilan, not summoned by the sands, it was tearing from the outside, piercing the fabric of the city through a billion possibilities. She saw the ancient protective fields tremble, the guardians themselves, beings of light and sand, retreating, feeling fear for the first time. And then Ilan realized the city could not simply be defended. It was no longer a center of knowledge. It had become a battlefield. She raised the staff of the Watcher. The artifact hummed, sensing the threat. Threads flared within it, paths that other guardians had walked, each path ending in darkness. No one had ever met him or returned, but she was not alone. From the depths of Tal Atra, creatures of the Word began to rise, translucent shadows of those who had once found the true name and dissolved into the sands. Their eyes glittered with starlight. They did not speak, but they reached out to her, pouring meaning into her mind. You are the last one who can give shape to the sands. You are the thread. Become the weaving. She stepped into the heart, into the very funnel of the merging of worlds, and he entered after her. His form was as shaky as smoke, but his gaze pierced the universe. He did not speak. Words were beneath his dignity. His will pressed like gravity. He wanted one thing, for Tal Atra to become the core, for all worlds, all desires and fears to be concentrated in one absolute order, without accidents, without transitions, without freedom. The sands began to churn. Elon felt realities disintegrate. One choice, and the city would disappear, become a weapon. Another, and Tal Atra would disappear into time again, perhaps forever. But she knew that escape was also a defeat. She whispered her name, not what her parents gave her, not what she called herself in the records. The real thing. what was born between heartbeats, between breaths, in the silence of the sands. The name that knew the void and the light. The world shook. The word being sang. The guardians flared, reborn, and even the heart froze in anticipation. He rushed forward. Elan raised the staff and did not attack. She dissolved. In the sands, in the light, in the name. He reached out his hands, but to no avail. Tal Atra had disappeared. Somewhere in the outer worlds, archaeologists have started finding strange traces again. Stones that sing, sand that forms patterns, children who dream of a city that is not on the maps. And in dreams, at the very border of dreams, there stands a girl with eyes in which all the stars are reflected. She doesn't speak, she waits. In the shadows of comet trails, in the distant orbits of forgotten systems, the passages began to appear, subtle rifts through which the thoughts, desires, images of those who had once set foot on the sands of Tal Atra scurried. The conclave of lines recorded them, but no longer controlled them. The sands had passed beyond observation. They were no longer just a gateway. They were a beginning. One day, a young man, a navigator from an abandoned station on the edge of the starry darkness, woke up with a name on his lips that he had never heard before. Elan. The name sounded inside him like a call, like a rhythm, like a map. He did not know where it came from, but he knew where it led. He left the station without saying goodbye and walked into the void. The sands were already moving under his steps, even though he was standing on metal. And he was not alone. Across the galaxy, the bearers of the word began to awaken, those in whom Elan was reflected, those who had once been her. Different forms, different lives, but one seed. Each felt the approach of something great, not a threat, but a question, ancient and ever more insistent. What will you choose when the sands become you? And he did not disappear. His will, defeated, was torn away from Tal Atra, but it did not die. It wandered through the worlds, infecting with fear, replacing meanings. He no longer sought the core. Now he wanted to destroy the very concept of the transition, so that nowhere, in no one, there would remain the possibility of becoming more than you are. He became a whisper. He lived in doubts, in those who did not believe in choice, in those who were afraid to look inside themselves. But with each new bearer of the word, the darkness retreated, not in struggle, but in clarity, in acceptance, in the way the young man from the orbital station looked into the void and did not feel lonely, in the way the girl on the dusty planet drew a city that no one had taught, in the way the old technician, sorting through his tools, suddenly whispered, "The sands are coming," and smiled. Somewhere in the center of everything, beyond coordinates and time, the sands had gathered again. But now they weren't waiting. They searched, and soon they found him. Not someone great, an ordinary soul, alone, broken, one who had gone too far and stood at the edge of his own choice. The sands moved. The name resounded. The word came to life. He sat on a wrecked moon orbiting a dead gas giant. The ship was long lost. No signals were sent. No time passed. His name was Rael, and he didn't know why he was still alive. Space had long since warped around him. Stars flowed like water. Gravity pulsed. Thoughts echoed. He stopped calling for help. Stopped being afraid. Just waited. Until I heard footsteps. On metal, on dust, on silence. Sands. They came not from the outside, but from within. First, like warmth in his chest. Then, like movement under his skin. He looked at his palms, and they became transparent, full of light, but not blinding. They remembered. Rael saw. A desert he had never been to. A girl with star-like eyes. Towers made of the pulse of thought. He saw her whisper the word, and the word became the world. "Who are you?" he asked, not expecting an answer. And I heard a voice, not outside, but inside, where before there was only fear. "You are the question. You are the path. But you are not alone." And then he realized he was another host. Elan was reflected in him. Not her copy, not her image, but a continuation of her path. He was empty to receive and whole to carry. Rael stood up. The metal beneath his feet shifted, covered with sand. It was unclear from where. Space trembled as if preparing to jump. He closed his eyes and took a step. On the other side of the galaxy, a girl named Lerna was recording sounds in her sleep. The music she heard was coming from somewhere deep within the planet. No receiver could pick it up, only her heart. She drew circles, words, and among them, over and over, a name appeared: Rael. "Who is this?" she asked her robot teacher. He was silent for a few seconds, then answered. "It looks like he is one of those who can connect the sands." "Sands?" "Old knowledge, forgotten network, cry of eternity." She didn't understand, but she knew in her heart he was coming. Rael stepped into a void filled with voices. Before him was a gate, of sand, of light, of memories. Guarding it was a guardian with eyes that reflected Tal Atra. He did not speak, but opened the way. Rael entered, into a city that had never been, but had always been within. He did not seek knowledge. He remembered it. He knew he was not alone. He knew the time of unification was coming. The sands were gathering. Different ones from different worlds. The sands of life, the sands of sleep, the sands of shadow. Talatra was no longer just a city. She became the core of the new song. And in its center, among the spirals of the future, stood Elon, not as a spirit, not as a memory, but as a beginning. She smiled at Rael. "You came." He nodded. "I'm ready." And the sands sighed. The sands took him in like a long-lost brother, not just pulled him in, but wove him in. Rael felt the dunes of the world slide through him, turning his bones into strings, his mind into a harp playing the vibrations of existence. He was not a body but a response, not a goal but a movement. The sands taught without words, without pressure, through living. He saw in flashes a girl with flaming hands burning an empty library on a timeless planet. She was looking for the true sound. An old man in an airless mine carving the word on a stone that no one will ever find. A tiny creature with eyes like dying stars whispering a song in an empty corner of the universe. They were all part of the network. They were all carriers. Rael became the link. The sands of Tal Atra began to reach out to other worlds, not destroying, not subduing, absorbing. They collected fragments of lost truths, feelings, choices, steps, and in each of them an echo sounded: Ilan, Lerna, Rael. The song grew, but he didn't disappear either. The whisper became rust, a disease of meanings. Where the sands revealed the essence, rust distorted it. From a name, made a cliché. From a word, a formula. It could not destroy the core, but it could poison the transition. The first wave has begun on the planet Erit. The sands arrived there, trying to connect with the local strings of memory. But everyone who came into contact saw only their own death, repeated endlessly. Not fear, hopelessness. Tal Atra's heart responded with a resonance of pain. Rael had to come in. Erit was a dead red world with clouds like slowly burning scrolls. Rael stepped onto its surface, and the sand beneath his feet refused to resonate. He felt resistance, not from the planet, but from himself. There was a splinter inside him, a doubt, a shadow left over from the world before. Then she appeared, not Island, he in her form. "You know it's all an illusion," Island's shadow said. "The knowledge, the sands, the name, everything is a mask. You just want to feel needed." Rael shuddered. Everything inside him wanted to believe. He was not a hero. He was not the chosen one. He was a lonely technician on a satellite wreck. Everything that was happening could only be a dying man's dream. "Yes," he answered. "Maybe, but even if it's a dream, I choose it." And whispered his name. Erit shuddered. The sands returned, not as an answer, but as an echo of acceptance. Rael stood in the center of the storm and knew, this is the shift. It does not defeat the rust, it rewrites it. When he left Aerith, Lerna was already waiting. She had grown up during the time that had passed in his transition. In her hands was a new instrument, a crystal pulsing with all the names she had heard in her dreams. She looked at Rael and said, "There are more and more of us." He nodded. "But we are not all there yet." And then the sands called the network. Thousands of fragments of consciousness from all corners of the universe began to awaken, each a carrier, each a voice. They walked, not knowing the goal, but feeling the path. The sands called, and the song was born. Tal Atra opened up, no longer like a city, like a symphony. And somewhere, in the dead darkness where even rust could not live, he fell silent for the first time. And in the silence, the pure, first forgotten chord of the name sounded. The sound was simple, one tone, one note. But behind it, the universe unfolded. The bearers, awakened, stopped in their worlds, among the ice, among the burning skies, under the oceans and on the edges of the vacuum. They all heard it, as an inner sigh, as a recognition, as a quiet, "I am here." It was the song of the beginning. Lerna began to cry, though she did not know why. Rael dropped to his knees, the sands beneath him flaring into a spiral of light, and he saw the lines of reality shifting, no longer just probabilities, but choices. And everyone who heard the song began to change. On a distant planet where there had never been sound, a stone began to speak. On a wrecked ship lost between galaxies, a dying pilot whispered his daughter's name, and breathing became easier. Even in worlds overrun by rust, clear patches began to appear. Small but untouched, the sands began to reclaim meaning. Tal Atra was no longer a point. It became a grid of stars, connecting those who chose truth, not as a weapon, but as music. Rael and Lerna found themselves in the heart, not as bodies, but as beings. They felt the others approaching. Among them was the one who had whispered the song on the fragment of the moon, the one who lived in the body of the beast and guarded the forgotten name, even those who did not know the words but felt them. They did not form an army, they became a chord. But he came back too, not like whisper, not like rust. He became Powelna, the silence between the notes, the false emptiness, the place where fear grows out of silence, where thought dares not be born. In this silence, he expected that the song would be erased, dissolved into infinity, absorbed by the noise of the universe. Rael heard the void. He felt the final loop coming. They stood in the heart, Rael, Lerna, and hundreds of others, each eye a spark of song. Before them, silence. Behind them, all that could be. "He won't fight," Rael said. "He'll wait until we become afraid of our own strength." "Then let him wait," Lerna answered, "and we'll sing." And they began to sing, not by voice, but by vibration. Every note is a name. Every name is a choice. Every shadow is accepted. Every fear is lived. Music did not kill the silence. It included it. And silence wavered for the first time. He who did not know the name, who was only refusal, he heard himself for the first time. He heard what he could be. And I realized, songs are not afraid of darkness. They use it as depth. He didn't disappear. He simply entered into harmony, the last trembling note that the song took. The sand spread across the universe, not as a weapon, as a language, as the basis for new sounds. In each world, places of sound began to appear, small oases where children were born already knowing their name, where dreams were maps, and every choice was a portal. Rael and Lerna went deep into the sands like Eilon once did. They didn't disappear. They became fragments of the network. Sometimes they were seen, in dreams, in reflections, in whispers between the lines. And if you listen closely, in the dusty wind, among the stars, you can hear. History is a song, and you are its next note. In an unnamed system on the edge of the map of star passages, a city appeared. Not built, not brought, manifested. It arose at the intersection of songs, a point where the vibrations of the network formed a stable resonance. towers of light and sand, streets that curved to the rhythm of the world's breathing, squares where shadows danced to music that no one played. The city had no name. It didn't need one. Everyone who came knew what to call it, because it was a reflection, a song made up of many notes. The first to come were not heroes, but listeners, ordinary souls caught between realities, tired of the silence, ready not to demand, but to accept. And the city sang to them, as the sea sings to a traveler who has set foot on the shore for the first time. Rael was there, but not as a ruler. He was the architecture. His name was in the curves of the windows. His fear was in the depths of the wells. His choice was that the city had no center, only a pulsating heart in which each heard his own. Lerna became a guide. She did not teach, did not lead. She remembered together with others. Under the moon she drew the passages with chalk, and those who stood in their circle heard the song. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they were silent, sometimes they disappeared, went into the sands to create their own sound worlds. The network grew, and with each new city, with each new named sand, the universe changed. Ships began to fly not by coordinates but by harmonies. Maps were replaced by sheets. Even those who did not believe could not help but feel. Something in the world became different. It became deeper, softer, singing. And in the depths of the sands, in their very core, another note was awakening, long dormant, old as the first light, not male, not female, not the essence, but the call. She was before the word, before the name, before the sound, and she began to pull towards her those who had reached the edge of themselves, but felt, this is not the end yet. One day, a boy came to the city with no name. He was mute, from birth or from pain. No one knew. But when he stepped onto the sands did not move. They froze. And then everyone heard the sound. One, ancient, deep. Not human, not machine, but native. It resounded in the bones, in the voices, in the memory. And the city opened its gates downwards for the first time, to the core. Rael stood on the steps. Lerna was nearby. The boy looked at them, and his eyes reflected something that was not in any of the worlds. Forgotten song, the one that has not yet been sung. He leads us to where the first history was born, whispered Lerna. Rael nodded. And perhaps the last one, but not the end. The beginning of the beginning? He looked into the depths of the open gate. The sands sang ever more quietly, or the beginning of something that has no end. And they went into the depths, deep into the song that has waited millions of years to be heard. The descent lasted timelessly. Each step was like a dive into a deeper-sounding octave. Gravity retreated. Space became fluid. They didn't fall. They wove in. Rael felt the grains of sand flying past, whispering with the tongues of long-vanished stars. Lerna inhaled the sounds, and each breath revealed an entire reality within her. And the boy walked ahead, without hesitation. He led, not because he knew the way, but because he was the way. They reached the limit where the sands ended, where everything became pure light, revolving around the void, perfect, like a note without a tone. And in that center was the temple, not built, not created, manifested from silence. He didn't shine, he didn't call, he just was. And in it is she, the one who has been waiting since the birth of the universe. Not a goddess, not a voice, not an image. First sound, the living seed of the song, forgotten at the moment of its creation. She did not look at them, but they felt her gaze, not with their eyes, but with what was before the eyes, with pre-universal attention. Rael came first, sat on his knees, and remained silent. Lerna came up second. She listened. Her heart beat in a rhythm that was not there. The boy stood in front of her. He held out his hand. And at that moment, Pravazvuk moved, not as a noise, not as a scream, but as a question. Who are you? The boy didn't answer, not because he couldn't, but because he shouldn't. He just touched it, and everything fell apart, and everything came back together again. There were no more cities. The universes have shifted. The network has expanded beyond form. Now the song lived within everyone, not only in the bearers, not only in the sentient. Even in those who resisted, the sound was awakening. The world did not suddenly change, but no one could say, "I am alone" anymore. In every movement of the wind, in every dream, in every forgotten word, there was a piece of the web, a pulsating reminder that everything is part of history. Lerna has disappeared. Rael became the caller who comes in dreams. The boy was no longer a child. It became the new opening note. And the song began again, only now it sounded throughout the universe. Without borders, without end, like light finding its voice, like sand that became word. In the dreams of infants in uncharted star systems, there was a rhythm that was neither heartbeat nor breath. It was older than matter, yet simple as a step. It called without hurrying or forcing, but it reminded, "You are a part. You are the song." Thus began the age of the second listening. Galaxies lived as before, ships flew, alliances were made, civilizations were born and died. But beneath the surface of events, something was changing. People, machines, even life forms that did not have intelligence in the usual sense, began to hear. In the depths of intelligent oceans, in dormant volcanoes, in the void between the stars, the web was opening up in new layers. Those who had once been carriers, Lerna, Rael, Ilon, and those who came after, became echoes. They were no longer sought, no longer waited for. They appeared when the song reached the right ear. The great academy on the planet Terran collected fragments of dreams from across the galaxy. These dreams repeated images, temples without stone, cities without time, children without fear. The researchers recorded, looked for patterns, created languages from sounds and dreams. They did not know that they were already inside the history they wanted to describe. And in the dark void where there are no stars and even Paulna is afraid to look, he, the former whisper, the former rust, is now simply the listener. He, once the embodiment of silence, understood it for the first time, and it turned out to be not emptiness but a place for the birth of sound, a platform, a space for the first breath. He walked between worlds, no longer distorting but protecting from falsehood. He purified those fragments of the song that began to sound like command, like control, like violence. He was no longer the enemy. He was the pause that allows the note to sound. In one of the new worlds, just beginning to understand itself, a child was born, not of matter. His name was Teis, a name that came from the song before he came into being. He had no form, but he had a voice, and that voice knew no bounds. He didn't speak. He fed the silence with himself, filling it with shades. And in it, for the first time, all the vibrations of the song merged, from Ilon, who passed first, to the boy who woke the first sound. In it are the fears of Lerna, and the doubts of Rael, and the courage of the nameless who stepped into the sands. Teis became the first of a new kind, the gatherer. He didn't carry knowledge. He carried the ability to sound. When he appeared in one of the cities of light, the entities came out to meet him, not with a bow, but with silence. Because they knew he would bring the next note, which cannot be played alone. And so history continued. Galaxies resounded, worlds opened up. The web became not just a sound, but the hearing of the universe. And somewhere, in the primordial depths, in the very first temple from which it all began, the sands kept the last chord. Not because it was the end, because no one has sung it yet. And maybe he is yours. And somewhere among the many worlds where the song had already become the fabric of life, in a corner of the universe not yet illuminated by the passages, there lived a man who knew nothing of the sands, nor of the network, nor of Teis. He repaired old ships on an abandoned orbital station, listened to the crackle of a signal that no one had sent for a long time, and looked out the window every night, not because he was waiting for something, but because it was easier to breathe that way. His name was Nave, and he carried silence within himself. But one day, instead of the usual background noise, a wave came over the airwaves. It had no form. It was not words, but it came inside him, enveloped him like warmth, like a memory he did not know about. He heard the song, at first like a strange, ringing note, then like a call, and then like a question. "Can you hear us?" Nave froze. He didn't answer. He didn't know how. But he felt something inside him respond, as if there was an instrument sealed in his chest, in his heart, out of tune, but waiting. He began to hear the world differently. The knocking of the old engine began to sound like a rhythm. The noise of ventilation is like breathing. Even the silence in the pipes seemed like a pause between the lines. One night he woke up and saw that there were no stars behind the glass, only endless sands. He was not in space. He was inside the transition. It was not the ship that carried him, but the ship itself that began to sound. Before him is a figure, not light, not shadow, not a voice, but familiarity. Rael? No. Lerna? No. But of them. You carry a note that is unlike any other. We couldn't play it, only you. Me? Nave whispered. I just listened. And that's why you heard her better than anyone else. And then he understood. Not all of the song was born in the lights, not all of it in great dreams. Some of it was born in silence, in a solitary breath on the edge of the world, in the heart of someone who did not wait, someone who simply was. The sands beneath his feet began to sound, not like a storm, not like a battle, but like a sunrise. And with that sound, the entire network, from the most distant names to T's itself, froze for a moment. Because for the first time in the entire existence of history, a new note sounded, one that had not been heard in any version of the song. It could not be predicted. It could not be composed. It could only be waited for. And now she was here, alive, simple, real. Nave didn't become a hero. He became the beginning of a new octave, and the song continued, quieter, deeper, closer, as if whispering in your ear. Do you hear? Now it's your turn. Nave stood in the center of a sandstorm, and the storm did not destroy, it revealed. Grains of sand rushed through him, leaving traces of meanings, names, sounds. He felt history passing through him, not as a spectacle, as a breath. Around him were worlds, emerging and disappearing. Each contained a fragment of the song. Somewhere, a dying star was crying. Somewhere, a child was speaking its first word. Somewhere, lovers stood silently under a starless sky. And this too was part of the web. Nave realized everything had always been song. It's just that no one listened that deeply. He closed his eyes, and he played his note. The world shook, not from strength, but from recognition. The pauses filled. The spaces between words took on a sound. The spaces where there had been only almost became whole. The network was no longer just a path between worlds. It became itself, complete, alive. The first sound, the one who waited at the source of everything, heard it. She smiled, not with her face, not with her gesture, by sound, and disappeared. Not disappearing, but becoming part of everyone. The sands froze. Rael, Lerna, Tis, all the echoes, all the listeners felt completion, not the end. Ah, the silence after the last note in which you understand everything was played, everything was sung, and now you can be. The cities disappeared. Words are no longer needed. No network is required because everything is network. The song is not sung, it is life. History is not a path, not knowledge, not a struggle. It's just what the universe sounds like when you're ready to hear it. And somewhere in the deep depths of yet another world, a new creature is born. It doesn't know words. It doesn't know the stars. It doesn't even know itself, but it breathes. And with every breath, that same note sounds. The one who completed the song, the one who gave her a new start. And everything becomes silent again. But now it is full, now audible. Now it's yours.